Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive myth that haunts almost every product and growth team out there, the myth of the infallible spreadsheet. Look, if you've ever stared at a giant grid of features and color-coded cells, spending an entire hour arguing with your team if a feature was a 3 or a 4 on impact, well, you're definitely not alone. We're going to look beyond the spreadsheet today to figure out what actually makes for a resilient strategy. Let's jump right in.
There's a really provocative quote from our source material that perfectly sets the stage. We treat numbers like high priests. Just think about your last planning meeting. There's this dangerous, almost desperate hope that if we just plug the exact right inputs into our formula, a high score will magically hand us the absolute right choice. We literally bow to the almighty spreadsheet cell. And why? Mostly, it's because we're hoping it absolves us of making the hard choices ourselves. But treating these numbers with that kind of uncritical reverence, it can lead us totally astray.
Section 1. The illusion of objectivity.
We use these mathematical models hoping to just completely remove emotion and politics from the room, right? We want a purely rational outcome. But here's the reality. Frameworks are communication tools. They are not automated decision engines. When you sit down and assign a score to a new feature, you aren't somehow uncovering a fundamental law of physics. What you're actually doing is just documenting a hypothesis. You're laying out your assumptions about impact and effort so they can be verbalized and, more importantly, challenged by the rest of the team. The second you treat those numbers as indisputable objective facts, you've completely lost the plot.
Section 2. Decoding the Big Three.
Let's pull these frameworks out of the tool belt and see how they actually play out in the real world. We'll start with RICE: reach, impact, confidence, and effort. Now, RICE is generally considered the most robust model, which makes it great for data-driven scale-ups. But focus on that third letter for a second: confidence. By explicitly building confidence right into the math, this framework actively forces teams to look each other in the eye and admit exactly how much of their estimate is just a pure guess. If you claim a feature will reach 10,000 users, but your confidence score is only 20%, well, you're admitting you're basically guessing. It's an incredibly powerful tool, but keep in mind, it's also the most expensive in terms of the time it takes to set up and maintain properly.
Next up is Moscow: must have, should have, could have, and won't have. This one is a categorization classic. It completely strips away all that complex math. It really shines in time-boxed projects because it's less about the overarching value you're creating over time and way more about figuring out what is absolutely mandatory to launch by a very specific deadline. It essentially draws a hard line in the sand. And honestly, it's brilliant because it forces you to admit what you're actually willing to sacrifice when the clock inevitably runs out.
And rounding out the big three, we have ICE: impact, confidence, and ease. ICE is absolutely the darling of growth teams. Why? Because by focusing on ease instead of the traditional effort, it inherently prioritizes velocity, rapid experimentation, and just getting things out the door. But a quick word of caution from our source: relying purely on ICE can definitely become a trap. It can tempt teams to constantly chase those small, incremental, easy gains, the low-hanging fruit, while completely ignoring the much harder, core product challenges that actually drive your long-term vision.
Section 3. The false precision trap.
So this brings us to the real core problem here: the subtle, structural danger of the spreadsheet itself. We've all been in those meetings where teams are constantly sweating over tiny decimals. We falsely assume that a feature with a score of 12.4 is fundamentally, definitively better than a feature sitting at 12.2. It's actually kind of comical when you step back and think about it. You've got a room full of highly paid, incredibly smart professionals spending an hour passionately arguing over a 0.2 difference, genuinely believing they are engaging in rigorous scientific planning.
And that perfectly illustrates why those decimals are a complete trap. Just look at the inputs for a second. Your supposedly objective impact score is, at the end of the day, essentially a gut feeling. And your effort estimate? Let's be real, it's highly likely just a best-case scenario guess from a very optimistic engineer. So when you multiply a gut feeling by a best-case scenario guess, you do not get precision, you get a highly fragile house of cards disguised as mathematics.
I really want to let this next point sink in, because despite all of our complex mathematical frameworks and despite the endless hours spent tweaking RIC scores, nearly 60% of product managers report that internal pressure, or the HIPPO, the highest paid person's opinion, still ultimately dictates the final roadmap. It turns out, the math often just serves as a post-rationalization shield to justify what the boss already wanted to do anyway.
Section 4. Moving to outcomes.
So if the math is an illusion, and the boss often makes the call anyway, how do we actually build a resilient strategy? Well, first, we have to know exactly when to use which tool.
You should be leveraging quantitative tools like RICE or ICE when you actually have a mature product with consistent user data and reliable telemetry to back up your inputs. On the flip side, you want to use qualitative tools like Moscow when you're in those messy early stages of discovery or when you're staring down a hard deadline where team alignment matters significantly more than perfectly optimizing a single metric.
Ultimately, the top-performing teams undergo a massive mindset shift. They move from output to outcomes. Instead of sitting around a table obsessing over the exact RICE score of one specific feature, they ask a much simpler but far more powerful question. Does this feature move the needle on our current OKR? That's the key. They make absolutely sure that their frameworks are serving their strategy rather than letting the framework define the strategy.
Section 5. The Hybrid Advantage.
Okay, here is a highly actionable playbook you can literally take back to your team tomorrow morning to get the absolute best of both worlds. It's a simple two-step process. Step 1. Use Moscow for alignment. Start by categorizing your massive roadmap into rough musts and shoulds. This gets all your stakeholders horizontally aligned on the big picture without anyone arguing about math. And getting this agreement up front is crucial so people don't start weaponizing the numbers later. Then, step 2, use RICE for sequencing. Take those buckets you just agreed on and use the math to logically sequence the execution and the order of operations within those specific categories. It's just a brilliant way to balance human alignment with data-driven execution.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to chew on before your next planning meeting. Ask yourself honestly, are you prioritizing calculation over conversation? Because if you can stop worshiping the spreadsheet and start prioritizing genuine conversation and alignment over rigid calculation, your roadmap isn't just going to be a list of numbers anymore, it will become significantly more resilient. Thanks for diving into this with me today, and keep questioning the numbers.